Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. We're a libertarian foundation. We promote the uncompromising moral, philosophical, and economic case for libertarianism. And this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, welcome back to the Libertarian Angle.
It's good to be back and with our viewers and listeners to talk about a new world.
Yeah, it really is a new world. It's like an earth-shattered world. The election of Donald Trump. I mean, this certainly shocked me, Richard. I thought that Clinton was a shoo-in, as did many other people. And lo and behold, we now have President Donald Trump. And so, yeah, it's appropriate that we talk about this. You know, of course, there's a shock effect. Everybody's shocked. I'm shocked. But I'm amused by it also, and let me just start out and give you my reaction to this thing. I am absolutely just busting the gut watching the reaction of these liberals. I mean, they thought they had it in the bag. They spent so much time and effort. I mean, the pundits, the commentators, the mainstream press, the political elite, every single day saying, that Hillary will be a fantastic president and Donald Trump's going to take the country down. And it's just so funny watching their reaction now. I mean, they're like paralyzed or panicked or a combination of all of that. And but notice the hypocrisy here, Richard. This is the thing that's really getting me, is the hypocrisy of the left. They're having these massive protests across the country against Donald Trump. Okay, but what really are they protesting? I mean, let's face it, the Democratic Party, the liberal community, with some minor exceptions, has become the warmongering party. Now, we all know they're socialists. I mean, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, the whole domestic policy scene is socialism. Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, Social Security. That's a no-brainer. But on foreign policy, you ordinarily expect liberals to be anti-imperialism, anti-war, all this foreign interventionism. This has become the warmongering movement, the liberal movement, the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton perfectly exemplified the warmongering mindset. She was going to bomb everybody. She was going to really go in there and have a regime change operation in Syria, even if that meant starting a war with Russia. And so now what they're really upset about, what they're protesting, all these protesters, is that their candidate doesn't get to be the bomber, doesn't get to be the killer, because they're not saying anything about foreign policy. They're just saying, oh, well, Donald Trump shouldn't be the president. This is horrible that he's going to get to drop the bombs. I mean, here they have an opportunity. If they want meaningful protests, Richard, they could have protests to bring the troops home from Afghanistan, to bring the troops home from the Middle East. I mean, they've been killing people for 15, 16 years. It's an absolute disaster, the regime change operations in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Now's the time that the entire country could be mobilizing the people, the protesters, demanding that this Donald Trump, this new president, shift America in a new direction. And instead, all they're doing is just demonstrating what hypocrites they are by complaining that Donald Trump's going to get to be the person that bombs and kills people and assassinates people rather than Hillary Clinton. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I really have empathy for Hillary. Here she is out of a job, and now she and her somewhat estranged husband has to withdraw to their little modest shack in Chappaqua, New York. And they're back in the situation like when they left the White House. But she said they're broke. I mean, they only have in their bank account, maybe $60, $80 million? I mean, how can you get by on that in Westchester County, New York? I mean, that's the taxes alone on your modest little shack. So I really have empathy for her. I feel her pain. And even worse, now that she's not Secretary of State, and she's not a candidate for the presidency, how does she and Bill strong arm and bribe people to give their hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation so they have no government goodies to sell in exchange, no favors? I feel her pain. I really feel sorry for her. I mean, she's now going to almost have to be an ordinary person. I know it's shocking, but I feel her pain. Now,
Richard, you're such a good person. I mean, no, really.
I know. I know.
You're very empathetic and very sympathetic. That's very nice of you.
That's why I'm really a person of the left. I feel people's pain. Anyway, it's not easy to go from being the 1% to the 2%. It's rough, but you'll handle it, I'm sure. Anyway, let me suggest that I take a slightly different take on it, Jacob, than you were just suggesting. I don't think that these people who are demonstrating really think about the foreign policy element of it. It's not as if that's a burning issue for them. They believe the reality and part of their own rhetoric about Donald Trump, that he's an egomaniac, that he's a crazy person, that he says things that are rude, crude, and offensive. But what they're most concerned, in my opinion, and why they're out protesting, is that whether it be the frustrated intellectual or whether it be the student out at Berkeley, as they were reported demonstrating yesterday, or in Los Angeles or a whole variety of cities, is that what they're concerned about is that Donald Trump, in conjunction with the Republicans who now continue to hold both houses of Congress, that the welfare state and their gravy train will be reduced. Now, I'm not saying that actually is what Trump is for or even said he's going to do, but that's their perception, that without Hillary Clinton, they don't get their favors and privileges for their designated politically correct minority groups. They might not get their free tuition to go to college. They may not get their free health care. They might not get, well, it goes on and on, of the redistributed welfare state. That is what they are frustrated about, that the person who promised them a continuation of living off other people through redistribution of wealth is now challenged by a corrupt, greedy businessman who only cares about the 1% and who will therefore destroy the minority rights of people and take away everyone's right to the goodies of the world. That is what they're protesting against. Foreign policy doesn't even enter into it. Now, I will say this. Is there hypocrisy and an inconsistency with the thinking of many people on the left in comparison to 20 years ago, 40 years ago, let's say 50 years ago? And you're absolutely right. Where were the liberals and the Democrats in terms of just standard party labels, and who 50 years ago were out protesting vehemently? Where are the people on the left who were upset with, fearful, and challenging the Cold War rhetoric of Ronald Reagan in the 1950s with his military buildup? Where are these people who were out protesting when George Bush invaded Afghanistan and then particularly Iraq? The people on the left were against this. But now first under Bush and then continuing for 8 years under Obama, who is the drone king of the planet, who believes clearly in a philosophy that in war there are causes worth killing people for but not dying for. It's easy enough to drone person from a computer screen when neither the drone operator nor anyone else in the field can be harmed. So it's okay to kill others as long as you're not putting any of your people in harm's way, because that might upset some voters. Now, where are these people today? They don't care about it. And what was Hillary Clinton's mantra on foreign policy, both domestically and for the ears of all the other political leaders around the world? I'm part of the consensus of the Cold War alliances built up after 1945. I believe America's presence. I believe America is supposed to foot the bill to assure this collective security network. I'm the one who's going to lead you to be tough with those countries that I and you agree are the bad bullies who have to be pushed back into a corner through the military and diplomatic might of the United States, whether it be Putin's Russia or China or whatever country. And that America's role in the world is to be the policeman of the globe. And all of you are our client states, and the reason you like us is that you don't have to defend yourselves because we give you a free ride. And it makes you feel good that you're helping all these causes with minimal expense to yourself. That is how she sold herself. And that's how she sold herself domestically. Now, as we've exchanged ideas on previous episodes of our show here, Donald Trump is not a non-interventionist on foreign policy. Does he think the Europeans should pay more of their fair share to cover the military expense of NATO? Yes. Has he called for America's unilateral or unconditional withdrawal from NATO because America should not be involved in such military interventions? No. Has he called for unilateral withdrawal of the United States from the Middle East, Iraq, our bombing of Syria? No. He said that it should be done more forcefully with some plan that he'll come up to, and then once we've destroyed those who we consider enemies of America and the world, we may withdraw, but there's no guarantee of that. So the fact is that she set up a straw man that he's the bugaboo who will undermine the interventionist collective security of the post-World War II period, that she would continue. When in fact he's going to have his own version of it, but to the extent that people care about foreign policy on the left, particularly the intellectuals who are concerned with political globalization, not free market globalization, they're the ones who wanted to keep her in power. But for the average person, like you're seeing these demonstrations on the street, we see them on TV, or I was reading them, I'm sure, like you, on the newspaper. These people are not concerned with foreign policy. They're concerned about being cut off at the trough of the redistributive state.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. But that's my point, though, is that they could be concerned about foreign policy if they took the same position that you and I do, that there's been enough death and destruction at the hands of the U.S. national security establishment in the Middle East and Afghanistan, that enough is enough. I mean, if you haven't done what you need to do by this time, it's time to acknowledge that it's been a failure and just stop pouring fuel on the fire. In other words, the left could be looking at this as an opportunity. There is no doubt where Clinton stood. She had positioned herself over the years as a right-wing hawk because she obviously figured this is the way she's going to be elected president, that she didn't want to be perceived as a George McGovern, as a peacenik, because then they would say that she's soft on the foreign policy and she's weak, and so she felt like, well, I can't get elected. I need to maneuver over into the interventionist camp, the pro-war camp. Well, it obviously didn't work. But if she had been elected president, the chances of ending this stuff would have been non-existent. She would have effectively been owned by the national security establishment, which needs all these wars and these crises in order to justify their existence. This old Cold War dinosaur known as the national security state, or as Eisenhower called it, the military-industrial complex. With Trump, you're right. He is an interventionist. He's on the same mindset as Hillary Clinton. But yet there's an unknown factor here. It's not. You get the sense that he's not ideologically committed to continuing these wars forever. In other words, there's a slight opening here, and even some libertarians are saying that he has a non-interventionist orientation to a certain extent. Well, so here's an opportunity, Richard, that if the left was as committed to ending this destructive nonsense as you and I are, they could be mobilizing at this point, having these protests saying, bring the troops home. It's time to bring them home. Massive anti-war demonstrations. And instead of having a demonstration that just laments that their person didn't get into office and now they're going to be losing their goodies. I mean, there could be meaningful protests, and these protests that they're having are absolutely ridiculous.
No, I agree. But I think that shows what is important to these people. First of all, the left has always been ambivalent, the American left, about American military involvement in the world. On the one hand, they've often been critics of it. But in the post-war period, through most of this time, I'm talking about the mainstream liberal Democratic Party movement, they have endorsed this. Now, there is the element that you're bringing out, the sort of the nuts and bolts of politics. Where do your campaign contributions come from? How does supporting this cause or that advance your political career and your reelection? Those who live off the redistributive state through defense spending and keep their rice bowls in the Pentagon. You're absolutely right about that. But we shouldn't downplay or ignore the fact that many of them believe that since Roosevelt's time, Franklin Roosevelt's time, that it is the duty and the destiny and the global security necessity of America to be policemen of the world. Now, when it goes awry, like it seemed to go in Vietnam and under Reagan's military buildup, it had more to do with the specific circumstances. In Reagan's case, he was the cowboy from California who was just a right-wing crazy. With Lyndon Johnson, it was the left-wing idea that this was a peaceful socialist liberation movement to bring justice and harmony to all of the Vietnamese, with America just crudely dropping bombs. But the left establishment have had no problem with these alliances of NATO, with South Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. They had no problem about this web of foreign military bases around the globe that, in fact, gives us presence and opportunity to involve ourselves militarily and accompanying diplomatic pressure on virtually every continent of the world. They've endorsed this. They've desired it. It is part of the interventionist mentality. If it is good to remake America domestically by government design, is it not good for America to attempt, when the circumstances seem right and the cause is good, to try to remake by design foreign countries, or to hold back those who they define as the evildoers who we must defend the world against? That is part of their entire political philosophy and outlook for over 70 years now. So it does not surprise me that many are not opposing this or rising up against these interventions. More than anything else, they opposed Afghanistan and Iraq because it was a Republican president who they hated. They have had no resistance and opposition to the same type of military interventions for another 8 years when it's been Barack Obama, who soothes them with different rhetoric and hides it from view with drone attacks as opposed to as many, quote, boots on the ground. But it is the same outlook that interventionism is good, both at home and abroad.
No, it's an excellent point. I mean, let's face it was Lyndon Johnson that really ramped up the Vietnam War in the first place, Democrat. And you're right. During the Bush administration, remember on the run-up to the Iraq War, there was massive demonstrations all over the world.
Yes.
And I would say they were predominantly from the left because the conservatives were supporting their man, George W. Bush. All of a sudden, Obama's elected, and I said this at the time, that the reason that Republicans are upset and conservatives are upset is because Obama might well continue the policies of George W. Bush, and they're put in the position of supporting Obama and what he's doing. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Obama came into office and continued the Bush legacy of death and destruction in the Middle East and Afghanistan. Nothing changed. It was like 8 more years of Bush. And immediately, the Democrats shifted gears, the liberals. Well, now we have to support our man. You don't see the massive protests against the massive death and destruction, including in Libya, where Hillary Clinton, that was her little personal regime change operation. No different from Iraq.
Absolutely.
And then you had the conservatives, of course, supporting all this interventionism. But, let me bring up another angle to this. That, we have long argued, Richard, since the inception of FFF, the principle of limited government, where you limit the powers of the president with the assumption that you have to imagine your worst enemy getting these powers. Do you want your worst enemy to have these powers? If you don't, then don't let anybody wield these powers. That they're really a free society is measured by the prohibition of powers that are being wielded by the president and the rest of the government. The Democrats and the Republicans, liberals and conservatives, every time their man would get into office, and especially after 9/11, they had no problems with vesting these omnipotent totalitarian powers in the president. Because you can trust the president. You know, you can trust George W. Bush with these powers, the power to assassinate people, the power to round people up and torture them and putting them in military dungeons. I mean, that's what the Jose Padilla case was all about. And they all love this. And then when their man Obama, the liberals wielding these powers, they love it. He can be trusted to assassinate the right people. He's going to keep us safe. Now it's all the chickens are coming home to roost, because here they have the man that they consider a maniac, a crazy man, that's wielding these totalitarian powers. But they are the ones responsible, Richard, because throughout all this time we were saying dismantle these powers, dismantle the national security state. Cold War is over. And now their worst nightmares are coming to pass. The man that they consider a maniac that has an enormous degree of volatility in his personality is now wielding these totalitarian powers. And is the solution a better person in public office like Hillary Clinton, like what they're saying should be Hillary Clinton? No. The solution is to dismantle these powers regardless of who's in office.
Yes, I will often say to my students when we talk about government policies, of course, teaching economics class, mostly domestic policies, but it's the same premise. And I'll say, think of the politician who you hate the most and trust the least. Now imagine him as the president, or as the senator, or as the regulator, or as the redistributor, who's determining how the power of government will be wielded to serve some at clearly always the expense of others. Would you like that person to have the current powers of the government in these domestic policy and interventionist and redistributive directions? Now, of course, most students, they think for a second, depending upon their politics, is someone who's Republican or Democrat, conservative, liberal. But clearly there's someone who they would not trust with these powers. And I say that is the reason why, in the wisdom of the Founding Fathers, they did several things. They eliminated the federal government to certain specific and enumerated functions in the body of the document of the Constitution. No more and no less. And they divided the power among three branches of government, and then a federal system of distributed and decentralized power among the federal government, the national, and the local governments, all meant to be as institutional checks and balances, guarantees that power will be not abused, guarantee that power will not be centralized? No, of course not. But an institutional setting in which the attempts to do so would at least face barriers that will make it more difficult to do so. Now, like water that keeps slowly dripping on a rock for a very long time, the rock finally gets worn away. And we've had drips of weakening of constitutional restrictions, drips of adding to government power, adding to executive authority, drops that have reduced the Congress being responsible constitutionally for its duties over the purse strings of the taxpayers' money. So that, in fact, our Constitution has been eaten away with the drips of interventionism and redistributivism and imperial presidencies. So it's not the same Constitution, but that's the logic of the Constitution, to try to make these types of executive overreaches more difficult. And to the extent that government presidents are not yet dictators in the United States, in spite of these executive orders, is the residue, the legacy, the remnants of what the Founding Fathers tried to set up with that Constitution. And Americans don't understand this, and they've lost belief in it. That's why these people are demonstrating. I mean, it was exemplified when Hillary Clinton, during, I guess it was the last debate between her and Trump, when both of them asked, what do you look for in a candidate for the Supreme Court? Did either one of them say someone who believes in a strict enforcement of the letter of the Constitution as understood in terms of the spirit and meaning of the Founding Fathers for the purpose of guaranteeing liberty. No. What does Hillary say? I'm looking for someone who believes in the rights of women, who will assure that gay and lesbians will be given special privileges like other groups. Now, that's not to say women should not have equal rights before the law. And it's not to say that anyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, should not be protected in their equal rights before the law as individuals. But what she was looking for is a judge who'd not be impartial evaluator. Is the law being practiced under the Constitution or violated? No, she wanted a lawyer that would assure guarantees of privileges, favors, redistributions. For some, at the expense of others, because these are the mascot groups who exist for the liberal progressives at this moment in time, which was different in the past and will no doubt be different in the future. And that's what these people who are out demonstrating want. We want government to do those policies we support and value and want for ourselves and the other groups that we consider more deserving at the expense of others. And that's why we need this person in there, because she has said she will do us what we want government to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, okay, so we've talked about the warfare state and the welfare state. In the few minutes we have left, we ought to at least mention some of a few of the other issues. I mean, there's the drug war, which I think is clearly we have a chance of getting rid of that in the short term here. I mean, you see a massive movement toward legalization of marijuana, and Florida just enacted medical marijuana. So I think under a Trump administration, if we ever got close to pushing this thing over the edge, I don't think he would fight it. I think Hillary Clinton would have fought it because of her allegiance to the drug war bureaucracy. But I don't think he has that same allegiance. The two areas are going to be very problematic, and hopefully, foreign policy will tend to move in our direction under a Trump administration. Time will tell whether that's going to happen or he gets co-opted by the Pentagon and the CIA. But there's the two areas that I think we're going to have the biggest challenge as libertarians is trade and immigration. Places where you and I have written many, many articles over the 27 years of FFF's existence that I think you're going to see him starting these trade wars, and that's where we come in and showing the benefits of free trade, the virtues of free trade, how this is consistent with a free society, how a Trump administration is destroying freedom with these trade wars, and also with this war on immigrants. And so we're going to have to be emphasizing important things to conservatives like free markets, free movements of people, and things that liberals associate with freedom of association, the concept of economic liberty. And so we have our work cut out for us, I think, in those two areas, Richard.
I agree. What I'm hoping in terms of just what pragmatically people have vested interest to do in Washington is that clearly the issues of immigration and especially trade are now becoming divisive and controversial factors within the Republican and conservative movement, because on general and average, conservatives and Republicans have tended for a very long time to at least give rhetoric and sometimes espousal to free trade over protectionism. And Trump is obviously challenging that. Of course, on the one hand, the conservatives at the Wall Street Journal say that America should be open to more people. They don't say everybody, but more people, because that's the lifeblood of rejuvenating our innovative creativity in America. Trump is against that far more than the Wall Street Journal wants to do any restriction, clearly. So that's a fighting issue. What I'm hoping for, at least in the short run, is that to avoid these internal fights, that the first issues that will come up will be ones more likely to be freedom friendly. It would be wonderful to abolish Obamacare, but at least to eliminate the mandate, to allow more private enterprise competition, and to whittle away the government's control and domination over medical care and treatment and the dictating of what we have to accept. Any movement in that direction, it may not be laissez-faire medicine, but would be better than what Obama's trend had been leading us towards, which was clearly single payer. The other element is that he has called for deregulation of business, both through reversing Obama's executive orders and through the Congress. And he's talked about various types of tax reductions. Now, of course, we're not talking about a libertarian or a classical liberal policy agenda. But what I'm hoping for is that to avoid their internal conflicts, they will attempt to work on him pushing those issues where conservatives tend to be more free enterprise rather than less. So at least, let's say, Trump's first 100 days, hopefully we'll see at least the diminishment of government intrusion, at least minimally, in some corners. And right now, I prefer to have a 1% improvement than a 0% improvement.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, I'm just not really optimistic about, let's say they repeal Obamacare. You're still going to end up with the massive healthcare crisis that brought about Obamacare. And that's because of Medicare and Medicaid and regulation. That unless you pull that weed out by its root, and I'm talking about a total repeal of Medicare and Medicaid, you're going to end up with a crisis. And so you either leave the crisis in place and you say, well, we got a crisis that's going to be forever, or you pass reforms. And so the push for reform becomes almost one that they can't fight. And so they get, as you point out, they're going to do something they're going to end up pushing a reform that's going to be in the opposite direction. So they may fall back and do this 1% improvement, but if the crisis is still there, the movement's going to be to enact a new reform that's going to be 10% in the wrong direction. And that's why I keep saying we've got to keep striking at the root and saying, here is the only solution to the healthcare crisis. Repeal Medicare, repeal Medicaid.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the point is that's not going to fly in America today because most Americans don't want the end of Medicare and Medicaid. And that's our dilemma. Our intellectual battle in making the case why government should be in the medical business no more than it should be in the shoemaking business or the shirt making business or the coffee making business is a long haul. All I'm saying is that if Hillary Clinton had been elected, it was clear that Obamacare was going to evolve if she had had her way over 4 to 8 years of her presidency to a totally socialized medicine system like the stereotype in France or Great Britain, which would be even a worse disaster than what we have now. All I'm saying is that given that we're not going to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid, and given the pragmatic expediency in which these people operate, if the federal mandate was abolished and if they allowed some degree of more market-oriented competition, it at least would be breathing space for some people on a day-to-day basis to have more options and less expensive health care. But you're absolutely right. In the long haul, for the establishment of a free society, for that point on the horizon towards which we as Friends of Freedom should always be moving, we must be making the case for the separation of government from the economy, and that includes health care as well. But all I'm saying is that if they lower some taxes, get rid of the inheritance tax, the corporate taxes, and at least get rid of this mandate, for everybody's everyday life, there will be more breathing space. But that should just be an opportunity for us to show, well, look, you've lowered taxes. You obviously believe taxes are disincentives. Why should you be taxing any of these private sector activities beyond constitutionally, to protect life, liberty, and property? Why should you be in the healthcare business if returning some choice to people and some discretion to people is viewed as good? Well, why should you be involved in any of this? And all I'm saying is that's the best that we can hope for as entrees and little examples to be pushing that long-run case that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is how do you improve life for the serfs on the plantation, and repealing Obamacare and the mandates and lowering taxes might well improve the lives of the serfs, but it's still the plantation. They're still the serfs, and our job is the free society, which means making people challenge the legitimacy of this combination of healthcare in the state, the legitimacy of economy in the state. And that because if people never think about that concept of, my gosh, you mean separate economy in the state and healthcare in the state and education in the state, then they won't ever go down that road. But I agree with you. They have to be made to realize that if we want a free society, you have to dismantle the infringements on freedom. Improving the situation is not going to be that free society. It may make life better, but it's not freedom.
I don't disagree with you, but let us recall when Richard Cobden and John Bright were leading the free trade movement in Great Britain in the early decades of the 19th century, leading up to the abolition of most of the restrictions in the 1840s against free trade. They were making the case that Britain should not have the government involved in these matters. Mercantilism and protectionism should be overthrown. The ideal, the goal is free trade. But the fact is that even before the agricultural restrictions were abolished in one fell swoop in June of 1846, they'd already been eating away, as best they could, in various manufacturing protectionism. And so that, in fact, their goal was there, but when an opportunity came around to either abolish or radically reduce a specific tariff, they took advantage of it.
All right, that makes sense. On that note, I'm sure we're going to have plenty of time to discuss and debate and argue this under the new Trump earth-shattering revolution here. But on that note, we're out of time, Richard. So we'll call it a day. And enjoy the visit and the conversation with you as always.
Until next time. Thank you, viewers.